to appoint our first education executive for 2018, and it seems a bit late in the day, but I wish you all the very best for 2018. Do you have any apologies? I have an apology from Ms. Algarda, who will join us part of the meeting, but the rest of us wasn't staying on. Any declarations of interest? If I see that coming in at any point in the meeting, if there's anything that anyone wants to describe. Okay, thank you. The group item 3, the minute of the meeting, for the purposes of accuracy, are we happy to do that? Any matters that aren't covered elsewhere that anybody would wish to question at this time? Okay, thank you. Agenda item 4 is. I think we're reasonably up to date, and I think we're getting into the cycle of things, but is there anything anybody would wish to raise or question? Okay, thank you. 5 is education executive.
Thank you, Convener. This is a brief report which deals with the appointment of members to the committee, firstly in respect of teacher representation and secondly in respect of parent representation. And the report sets out the process that's been undertaken in relation to both appointments and to the committee to appoint the familiar faces of Fiona Craig and Margaret Smith as the teacher representatives, and in respect to the parental representatives to welcome 2 new members to the committee. First of all, Nicola Jordan, who's present this morning, and secondly, Karen Project, who's unable to attend this morning, and we've heard apologies already. One thing I should add to the recommendations is simply to confirm that the appointment will be for the term of this council, so to the next council elections.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, we have some familiar faces that are here, very, very welcome, and I would welcome those new parent reps as well, and Karen obviously in her absence. I'm happy to move the recommendations at 2.1 that we are looking to appoint those.
I'm happy to second that, and I would also like to convey my welcomes to the new parent reps. And I hope that at any point you feel that you want to ask a question, or if there's anything you need clarification over, just ask us.
Thank you.
Convener, can I make a comment regarding pupil reps, if that's
acceptable?
Yeah. We're undertaking a similar process regarding pupils, however that's been slightly delayed due to the prelim exams that they're currently undertaking within schools, so we're inviting schools to nominate pupils to be considered for the representative, and if we get more than 2 we will then obviously move to conduct an election from the pupil population regarding those individual pupils from the pupil councils that they represent, and hopefully bring a paper to the next meeting.
Okay, so we anticipate the process to be concluded for the next meeting?
I would hope so, yes.
That's great. So I think we do miss having that aspect. Margaret?
Yeah, just a comment, Chair. It's just to highlight that in one secondary school, the teaching staff didn't receive the ballot papers. We have no wish to rerun the vote, but it's just to highlight that the process didn't get right down to the teachers in one secondary school in particular that I know.
Okay. Do we know the particular reason why?
We're actually undertaking an investigation as we speak. I spoke to the school in concern, and we're really just trying to understand what exactly happened. Communications were issued through the normal processes just prior to Christmas. For the reason the office did not distribute that email widely across the teaching population within that particular school, so we're looking to address that to make sure that that doesn't happen again. But we were very grateful for those involved that they actually then were happy to stand by the decision that had been reached by the other schools at this point and did not insist on a rerun, so we're grateful for that.
I think that's very welcome. However, I do think the democratic process needs to be upheld. We need to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to participate in the future. I think our technological systems need to just be checked for that. Okay, if there's no other questions or matters relating to the education executive membership, we move on to item 6, and that's the forefront collaborative. Robert?
Thanks, Convener. The collaborative was agreed at the last meeting on the 7th of November, and there's reference to that at the beginning of the report. And in terms of the recommendations, asking, first of all, to consider this update report, but also a further report will come detailing further progress and indeed the finalised version of the initial regional improvement plan that's due to be submitted to the Scottish Government by the end of the month. At the last meeting, there were a number of things agreed. One was that there would be a lunch event organised. That lunch event took place at Carron Grange High School on the 1st of December. It was a relatively modest affair, but what we managed to do was bring together the council leaders from the 4 councils, the 4 portfolio holders and the chief executives of the 4 councils to agree on an initial course of action in terms of getting the collaborative established. There was also a briefing session held for all elected members in Falkirk on the Regional Improvement Collaborative. The work that's gone on over the course of November and December is primarily that we have established a series of different working groups at this stage, made up of officers of the 4 different councils. These groups have met on a number of occasions, and what they've done is they've identified areas that we all have in common that we wish to work on. The aspiration of Scottish Government and Education Scotland is that the Regional Improvement Plan will reflect the collective school improvement plans from across the 4 council areas. So to that end, what we did was an analysis of each council's individual National Improvement Framework Plan, which was submitted to Government last August. We've also looked at a variety of different data sets and evidence banks in terms of inspection reports and so on. So we've identified 5 key areas that we're going to be working on: literacy and numeracy, career-long professional learning, performance and improvement, and early years. And there's a report later on early years specifically on the committee. One of the things that we've been very keen to do is make sure that as many people as possible are cited on this initial plan and the areas that we intend to work on. And to that end, we arranged what we called a regional summit, which actually took place yesterday in Alva Academy. This was an event attended by 15 head teachers from each of the 4 councils. We also had parent reps from each of the 4 councils, we had pupil reps from each of the councils, we had LNCT reps from the councils, we also had all the portfolio holders attending the meeting, and indeed the chief executives of the 4 council areas. Attending that meeting, we had a presentation from a gentleman by the name of David Istance, who's a senior analyst with the OECD and was one of the co-authors of the OECD report into Scottish education in 2015, stemming from which came the emergence of recommendations around collaborative working in education. So he addressed the gathering yesterday. We were also pleased that we had Graham Logan, who's Strategic Director with Education Scotland, sharing latest inspection evidence with us on collaboratives and collaborative working and the difference that it can make. And finally, we were pleased to be able to welcome the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, who was able to provide some commentary on the emergence of the 6 regional improvement collaboratives, but also to give us some commentary on the early stages of our work and what he hopes will be taken forward over the course of the coming months and years. So the position that we're in now is following that event yesterday. Over the course of the remainder of today and tomorrow, I'll be meeting with colleagues to gather the views and commentary that we got back from the roundtable discussion that we had yesterday. That will allow us to make final amendments to our draft plan. I'll be meeting with the chief executives and the council leaders at the end of this week, just to make sure that everybody is cited on what we're going to submit to the government, and that plan will be submitted to the government during the course of next week. The deadline is the end of January. Following that, my understanding is that we will continue to work with colleagues in Education Scotland, and they'll provide us with some commentary back on their review of the 6 regional improvement plans, and give us some next steps for further development. In terms of the planning here, I mentioned earlier that we've got 5 groups established. We had a second session yesterday afternoon where we engaged with frontline practitioners. Part of this collaborative work is focused on making sure that we reflect the views of not just head teachers but all of our staff. So we had early years practitioners, primary practitioners and secondary practitioners discussing with us the themes that we were looking at, and also inviting them to comment on areas that we might want to develop further next. So all of these events will continue, and we'll be putting some more meat on the bones of the specific actions that are going to be taken forward, led by each of the different councils, but involving the staff from across the piece in all 4 council areas. So as Gary will say later, in terms of early years, we've talked about iterative processes. I think the regional collaborative will be a continuing iterative process, and I would expect to be probably bringing a report to every cycle of the committee.
Thank you. Robert, I think this is at an early stage of the collaborative, and it's finding its feet. But I think there's great opportunities there to be able to share practice across the regional collaborative areas. The draft plan, while that's going to be signed off and sent to government, is a potential there to be able to share that with the wider elected membership. And I think people will be interested in seeing what the content of that is.
We'd be happy to circulate that once it's signed.
That would be welcome. Therefore, I'm happy that we are progressing. I look forward to our reports coming forward. And move the recommendations as in section 2 to note the progress of establishing a collaborative, and agree that the regional lead officer submit further reports as we move forward.
I'm happy to second that report. Just to say that I attended the regional summit yesterday, and it was excellent. It was well orchestrated. Thanks, Robert, for that. There was a good balance between those that are professional with the knowledge, and the head teachers and parents. The young people that spoke were excellent. Some of the things they brought forward about IT and about how we need to make better connections with the local businesses and career building, and that was very good. And the parents, although some of them felt a bit in awe at the beginning, were very good questions that came forward. We were a bit disappointed in the fact that we had our Deputy First Minister standing there waiting for questions, and there's all this buzz in the room, and nobody wanted to particularly ask questions. We ask them for this, ask them for that. They had the opportunity there, and so that was a wee bit disappointing. But I dare say there was a lot of knowledge, there was a lot of discussion yesterday, and I think a lot of people were going to go away today and think this through. But certainly people are embracing they like the idea that we've been talking about sharing best practice for so long. Now we're actually moving towards doing something about it. So thanks again, Robert, for that.
Great, members open up. Any questions? Mr. Kelly?
Sorry, this is just a small practical point. I'm sorry I didn't pick it up earlier, but the rolling log mentions the launch event, and it says it's in progress and actually it's completed. So just on a practical game.
We thought we cracked it, up to date, but it goes to
It's not actually, we're actually way ahead then.
We're way ahead, yeah.
Any other questions for Robert? Margaret?
Yeah, I've got a few comments and just a couple of questions. 5.4, I was delighted that the LNCT staff side reps were invited, and they were delighted to be included at the summit yesterday. In 5.5, it was the second session with the opportunity for front-line practitioners from early learning, etc., to be there. How were these people selected? What group of teachers, staff were there? What grade were they? How many actual classroom teachers were there? And the big question I want to ask you, Robert, it's a bit about your vision. What difference will the regional collaboratives make to classroom teachers in Falkirk? And what impact will the plan for the collaborative have in their workload in schools?
Okay, first of all, there were 4 early years practitioners, 4 primary teachers and 4 secondary teachers. I think at least one of the primary teachers mentioned that she was currently an acting PT, but the intention was that these would be unpromoted staff. And there was 4 there there were 3 from each of the 4 authorities. So it was identified as a focus group. In terms of selecting the individuals, we asked our respective education officers to identify people that they knew that were not at the beginning of their career, not promoted, and people that they felt would be confident in a forum to speak up and to share their views. So there wasn't any complicated selection process. But given that they were going to be meeting with 4 directors and also with an international expert and various other people, we wanted to make sure that it was people that were going to be not overawed in terms of having that discussion. And I would say that the discussion that we had with them was outstanding. In terms of the difference that this will make to the front line, that was one of the things that session was about. Was about asking them what would make the biggest difference. And part of their feedback was very much along the lines of sharing practice and taking practice to scale. There was discussion about, where we have many opportunities for classroom teachers to be working together, which is part of the intention and part of the future iteration of these groups. Although the overview and structure will be done initially by education officers, very much we think that the collaborative work will happen among and between schools and among and between frontline staff. So one of the examples that we teased out yesterday was in terms of some specifics around early acquisition of literacy and the sorts of interventions that might be planned and the focus of what that work might be. And what we explored was, and this is just an example, was when I put it to one of the classroom teachers, do you have a working time agreement? And of course she said yes, and I said, so do you have a number of hours for planned staff sessions? Yes. Do you have a number of working groups in the school? Yes. I said, are you on more than one working group? Yes. And I said, do you think that any of the activity that you're working on will be being replicated in other schools? And she said yes. And I said, well, in future I anticipate that rather than you going along to that meeting with your colleagues in your school to look at that item, what I would be encouraging your head teacher to do is say, allow this teacher not to go to that meeting, but to go and collaborate with colleagues elsewhere that have already done that work. And I'll tell you where to go, because we've sampled it, we've evidenced it, we've satisfied ourselves that it's good practice, so go and get it and replicate it. And that's how you would use your time more productively. So that's just one little example, and these examples will emerge. It's I believe fundamentally about changing a culture, rather than having a culture where we all need to do everything ourselves and own it, that we recognise that things that are in different stages in different places, not just among and between our schools, but across the country. Another example that we were talking about yesterday is, Councillor McHugh mentioned it came from the pupils, about consistent use of ICT. So rather than one of our secondary schools developing an ICT committee for digital learning, if we know there's good digital learning somewhere else, they've developed a policy, they've developed a strategy, they've developed materials. Not to say that everything is replicable, because all schools are different, but there's a vast amount that can be shared, and part of this process is going to be about systematising sharing and scaling up.
On that, Robert, what I'm hearing is much of this is also coming from the bottom up rather
Yes.
than the top down, and I think that's got to be very welcome, because that means that it's those that are actually delivering the learning that are actually shaping things, and we recognise the skills, the knowledge and the experience there.
Can I just come back? I think the change of culture is going to have to happen, and it's going to have to be a change of culture in trust in the staff who are actually going out to other places, and trust them to come back and feed back to their peers, and not the micromanagement that is what's happening at the moment.
Councillor Neville?
Thanks, Convener. We are where we are as far as the new structure is concerned. There's one very important thing that's missing for this report, and that's the cost. I know there's discussions ongoing nationally with COSLA regarding the cost implications. For ourselves, there's obviously a secondment, a director's on secondment, there's a cost involved in that. And as a local authority, we must know what the cost is, even if it's for a period of 6 months, or whether it's going to be extended, we don't know that yet. In times of tight budgets, this is an additional cost to the local authority, and we need to know exactly how much it's going to cost and what it's worth.
Sorry.
There are ongoing discussions about the cost of this and about the resourcing of this. There's a new national forum called the Scottish Educational Council. On that council are the 6 regional leads, as well as representatives from all the major trade unions, the SQA, Scottish Government, Education Scotland, and so on. And it is something that is being explored. My understanding is that the Scottish Government have something called a transformation fund, and I heard yesterday that there have been some discussions about whether or not there will be any money allocated from that, which is not specifically for education, but whether there will be any money allocated from that to regional collaboratives. Fundamentally, however, if you leave aside the cost of seconding me, the thinking that is emerging is about doing things differently, rather than spending more on doing a different thing. So in the same way that I described the example of the teacher perhaps spending their time in a different way, so too have we begun to explore how local authority officers spend their time in a different way. So within the themes that we're working on, and I'll take the one that we're leading on as an example, the career-long professional learning. One of David's colleagues, Rona J, is leading that, and she's been involved in spending possibly a day and a half a week on that activity over the course of the last 6 weeks. And at first we were concerned that would mean that she was not doing certain other things here. But in fact, some of the benefits that have flowed from that means that some of the other stuff that would need to be done here doesn't need to be getting done, because what we're getting is payback from work that's been progressed in other arenas by the other local government officers. So as we move through this process, I think what we're talking about is sharing benefits in kind. There will always be a question of, could we use an extra 100,000, an extra 200,000 to have, for example, project management support and all those sorts of things. But at the moment, I'm certainly of the view that we've made an awful lot of progress without spending hardly any money at all.
Okay.
Thank you, Convener. It was mentioned the improved change in use of IT, and does that include mobile phones and stuff? Because most children nowadays have the internet on their phone, so they've got a dictionary, they've got a thesaurus, they've got an access to the best encyclopedia in the world. And change, as you say, it's a time to rethink things, and learning stops then just being a memory test when you have that access to that information in your pocket. So how are we going to roll forward that type of change, which is, everybody talks about the benefits of the internet and the World Wide Web and about getting Wi-Fi and broadband and rolling that out, but to really force that change is going to really we're going to have to change a lot of things on education, like say we've changed in the council, you get everything on the internet, try to deal with paper copies apart whereas dinosaurs. How are we going to handle that change? I understand there was a demonstration yesterday from children, is that right? No?
No.
But the change is going to be immense.
We already have a kind of protocol, bring your own device. We have Wi-Fi available within all of our secondary schools, and I mean, there's a delicate balance between providing access to the internet with having the requisite controls so that you can't access different prohibited content. But we already have a situation in St Mungo's whereby youngsters can bring their own iPad, they can bring their phone, they can bring their laptop, and they can access via the GLOW system very much of their learning materials. A lot of the courses are now online and so on. So that capacity exists. Our colleagues in West Lothian have done some early work on what they're calling a virtual campus, so they're delivering some of their courses entirely online and via the internet. So that's one of the things that we want to learn from them and scale up here. So that capacity exists. One of the challenges for us is not so much about the technical feasibility of it, it's about encouraging the staff to want to work in that way with the youngsters. As I say, we've already got a very good example in St Mungo's, and the next step is for us to be replicating what goes on in St Mungo's Falkirk High and Grangemouth High and so on. We also are working our way through making sure that we've got Wi-Fi access in all of our primary schools. We're not there yet, but included within the capital plan, if I'm right, Gary. There's a further rollout of Wi-Fi access in primary schools, and again, we would be maybe not to the same extent, because I would certainly not. I would hope that primary school children are not taking mobile phones to school, but there'll be scope there for them to use their own devices in the future, in the not too distant future as well.
Councillor, you want to add to that?
I just wanted to say, to clarify, there was a 6th year and a 5th year pupil at Alba Academy yesterday gave a presentation on what they see the future of our education moving, and part of their presentation was about the use of ICT, and they spoke about online learning. Our young folk are embracing. I think some of our teaching staff are a wee bit frightened about how that goes and how to control that, because we do have to get the balance. Because if one minute you're getting a report telling you that children are on tablets and their phones far too much, and then the other side of things, we want to embrace this, to use it in an educational manner. So the presentation was from to the senior pupils on what they found, speaking to other pupils within Alba Academy.
I know our universities have embraced it a great deal, and I don't mean that when you have to give a presentation or anything that's just a print off of somebody else's work, but there's a great tool there, and a very cost-effective tool, and the way that people will learn. Look at newspapers, or the demise in newspapers, that most people get their news and information now via either social media or the internet, and education will change dramatically, because we will become a lot more than just a smart board. We'll be a smart tablet.
I think you're absolutely right, Councillor, and just a small anecdote, and I'm not advocating this for all young people, but I met one young man at St Mungo's who was entering his 6th year, and the previous year he'd done 5 hires, and he told me that for the entirety of the previous year, all he brought to school was his iPad, unless he had PE, because all the courses that he'd chosen were all available online. The teachers he was working with marked his homework electronically. He could write on his iPad. He could even do maths calculations on his iPad. So that transition had been made, and for the likes of that young man going to university, where he's going to be accessing virtual learning environments and all the rest of it, the step had already happened. And as I mentioned earlier, one of our tasks is to make sure that accessibility is there. It's not everybody's preferred learning style, but for those that can access that way, then that's something that we should definitely be building on.
I think we also have to be careful and get a balance and bring some of those that maybe aren't as able or as technologically minded as others along, but I think the pupils themselves will be dictating as we go forward. I've got Reverend Rowe and then I've got Councillor Alexander.
Thank you, Convener. It's probably more of an observation, but it's a question in itself. I think things like collaboration and changing culture are to be highly welcome. I think these are great things to be done in any organisation. We're just thinking that there's obviously creativity in every council to come up with their plans. So when there's collaboration, if somebody has invented the wheel before, then we're going to take it on board what they've invented, and that's great. And how does the future look then? Will there be a reticence to develop new systems locally in terms of putting in resource in that to develop a new thing? If other people are going to take it on board, will people be willing to then say, well, we're going to devote a certain amount of our time for our staff to go and develop a system for somebody else to get the benefit of it? So in the future, how does that look? will there be kind of forums where people will be able to come together, the kind of development type of people, the creative thinking people that are going to be coming across the board? So how does it look in the future? Or is it going to be more centralised, and what we get is whatever the government says that's going to be filtered down? Will we lose that creativity? I think Kodak was the market leader in doing digital stuff, and they had all the stuff ready, but they thought everybody was going to be going with photographs and not going digital, so they were late in launching it. So I think a quote was that they created a great culture, but they became very cultish because they were just interested in themselves and thought they were the market leaders. So I think the whole thing of creating a new culture and the whole system of creativity is good, but how do you take that forward is really my question. Do you dissuade people from doing that, or is there a mechanism to maintain that creative thinking and innovation?
You do the opposite of dissuading. You encourage and facilitate. A quote from Graham Logan in yesterday's event, which stuck with me, was what we need are less initiatives and more initiative. And I think the idea of changing the culture is one where what we're going to be trying to encourage is that instead of individual schools being islands and individual schools having a focus on being primarily concerned with what happens in that school and how they look as an individual school, and being very concerned about their own inspection report and very concerned about their own results. We're trying to generate a system where, and I'll use the example of mathematics because that's what I knew. If I go back to the days of being a principal teacher of mathematics, and I use this example provocatively, and I've used it in the last few weeks, but I'll give you it anyway. As a principal teacher of mathematics, I had two key concerns about personal accountability. One was, how does my results compare to the English department? And secondly, how do my results compare with the other schools in my council? Once I'd satisfied myself that my department was top of both of those lists, I was in a comfortable place. And where we want to get to is that the individual practitioner becomes primarily concerned with the outcomes, not just for the children in front of them, but for the children in that arena across the piece. So if I take myself back and I had developed, let's say, a particularly innovative way to teach trigonometry using modern technology, the culture we're trying to engender is not just that the children in front of me would benefit from that, but that I would be supported and encouraged to make sure that that practice went as wide, not just across our collaborative, but across Scotland as possible. What we're trying to do is at the highest level of ambition, is reinstate Scotland as one of the recognised best learning systems in the world. And rather than having individual creative, inventive teachers in a box where you can't do that because it's not the policy or it's not the way we do things in this school, what we're trying to do is turn that around and say, you've got a great idea, you've developed it, you've tried it, it's working, the children are benefiting, let's take that somewhere else. So, I think it's the reverse of what you suggest, is that I don't see this closing things down, I see this opening things up.
Thank you.
Yes, this is an emergency. Right. That's the living up to yeah, the batteries off at me as well.
Who's that?
Right, just carry on as normal. Okay? Yeah. What's my thread now? Yeah, the whole issue of, I think that Robert's answer to the whole really sums up, I think, the whole thing. And we've got to look at the issue of value as opposed to cost, because the value in what we do is will determine to a certain extent the cost implications for the council. And if the value outweighs the cost, then it has to be something that is deemed to be appropriate and deemed to be desirable for our young people. And it's something that this authority is not a stranger to. The 2002 inspection of the Education Authority itself produced a reaction within the schools of, well, what's that got to do with me? The Education Authority was seen as something distant. It was seen as something that there was no input into and no input from. And the schools were very much seen in isolation. That's something that has changed quite radically over the years, and that's to be welcomed. And it's where you go next, the next step, and the next step has to be looking at other local authorities, learning from their actions, whether they be mistakes or whether they be improvements, and sharing in our best practice. And I don't think that we have anything to fear in that particular sense, because I think that we have gone through the pain in the past to get to the gain that we're seeing at the moment. But it's moving that forward to the next level. And I think that I cannot, for the life of me, understand why corroboration and collaboration are seen as something negative in terms of Education Authority, because you learn from people, and also you help others learn from you and from your experiences and your skills. So I think that I'm delighted that we're receiving the reaction that we're receiving from the teachers, from the schools and from pupils, because while I think the Scottish education is still one of the world leaders, it has, in terms of the league table, if you like, slipped, although it's more draws than defeats that's taken us down there. But I do think that there's an opportunity through this to change that culture, but that has to be done at every level, and that includes this committee, it includes the elected members of the authority. We have to recognise that there's a challenge before us, and we've seen the government's actions in terms of the attainment levels and in terms of their determination to close the gap between those at the top and those at the bottom of attainment levels. And this goes hand in hand with that particular approach. But we can't do it if we are continuously negative towards those who are looking to make the major change for us, and that is our frontline staff. So I certainly welcome the report, welcome the verbal update from the Director. I think it's incredibly important that we receive that on a regular basis, and if we get an indication that perhaps the direction of travel is not successful, equally it's on the onus of the Director to come back and tell us where that is going wrong, to allow us the opportunity to fix the particular problem. So with that, I'm delighted with what's happening this morning, and that's from someone who thinks a tablet is still something for fixing us head.
I think we're at an exciting juncture within education. I think this could actually be the catalyst to make a significant difference. And we have to remember, the reason for this is to give our children the best possible start in life. They will be the future directors of education, the future politicians, the future teachers within their schools. So we want to make sure that they have the best possible chance of achieving that, and we can see the benefits of that being passed down. So you have the commitment from the Robert as the regional lead officer that every cycle will have a report. He will keep us cited on that, and as things develop, and there's perhaps opportunities for members to get further briefings on some of the more practicalities of how this will work and what's experience some of the things that are going to be delivered through the learning from their staff. We will look to make sure that the opportunities are there for those briefings and for the participation. And again, I think we should be looking to try and do that in a more collaborative way, so that members get the opportunity to meet with other members from within the collaborative as well, because I think we could all learn from each other in doing that. Okay, thank you. I think we've given that. Yeah, you agree with the report? Yeah. Move on to item 7, which is a special support needs in primary and secondary schools. David?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dina. This report has been brought back in relation to the request that we received in September 2007, where we asked to go out to full public consultation with regard to development of further ASD provision within Falkirk Council. The report summarises the finding of the statutory consultation that took place between the 13th of September and the 10th of November 2017. The recommendations are that the response of the consultations are noted, and an instruction is given by the Executive for the Director to develop a further report which provides greater detail into the specificity of how these particular proposals could be then developed and rolled out in the near future. As I said, the statutory consultation took place across the 5 schools. That was Bowness Academy, Larbert High School, Sacred Heart Primary School, Moray Primary School and Eastern Carnmuir Primary School. That involved engaging with the parents of those particular schools and the representatives of the parent councils of those schools. In addition to that, the head teachers themselves were having informal discussions with their parent groups and their community as the process was ongoing as well. And again, the results of the consultation process are detailed in 4.2. We did issue just under 8,000 consultation notifications across the various communities to ensure that everyone had the best possible opportunity to engage with the process. The majority of that was undertaken via email. However, where parents or members didn't have emails, there was a written request also sent out inviting them both to the public meetings and also inviting individuals to respond on the online survey. 4.2 indicates that we received a total of 107 responses to the online survey, and the outcome was detailed there in terms of the 86% in favour, 10% not in favour and 4% undecided. In relation to the size of the response, that is not untypical in terms of this particular type of consultation, and in fact was greater than we've experienced in other consultation processes of a similar nature. 4.3 summarises the kind of key comments in support or against. It should be noted that the majority of the responses against are from relatively small samples of between 2 and 5 individuals, or as in terms of the last paragraph, from single individuals in relation to the proposals. In addition to engaging with the community, as part of the consultation process, Education Scotland are also involved in the process, and they attended 3 of the public consultation meetings, in addition to also going out to visit each individual school, where they spoke to parents, teachers and pupils in relation to the proposals to understand what their views were on it, and to get a sense of the locations that we're looking at and the practicalities thereafter. The education report from them was in favour of the development and highlighted the advantages that could be seen in terms of supporting the children and young people with additional support needs and the opportunities for the mainstream schools that we had targeted. In addition to that, it did raise a number of concerns in regard to the location and access to some of the accommodation, the recruitment and training issue, and again I think that's really in line with the national challenges we're facing around recruitment and training, and also the timescales that we're proposing. In relation to addressing these three and some of the other concerns raised by parents, that's the proposed response that could be contained within the further paper to be brought to committee, where we'll detail in much more detail in terms of actually the nature of the provision, the cost implications of the provision, and refined timescales for the rollout, and therefore come back to committee for consideration and decision in terms of actually which of or all of the proposals that we'd be looking to implement thereafter. Section 5 really looks to articulate how this particular proposal links to the Children's Services wider strategy of closer to home, and the fact that we're looking to ensure that we've got greater opportunity for as many of our young people to have their education provision delivered as locally as possible and as practical to meet their specific needs. Section 6 looks at some of the implications. 6.1 highlights the financial implications. Then we've set aside £369,000 earmarked in relation to additional support for learning expansion within Falkirk Council, and that will be used to resource the proposal moving forward, and again that's for the decision probably in March. The legal matters raised in 6.3 again generally relating to the usual education legislation, specifically relating to children with additional support for learning needs and the implication of equality legislation. The risks really then articulates that in terms of actually if we are not in a position to meet those individual children's needs through special provision, what might then the council be exposed to in terms of parental requests for those needs to be met either within their mainstream provision or within external provision to the council. We do think this is a very exciting opportunity within Falkirk Council. We are mindful that we are taking our time in relation to this particular response because we want to make sure that we get it right. We are really keen, and we were very grateful to those parents that did engage within the process. They raised very, very valid points, both in favour of and against of these proposals, and it's really up to myself and the team to make sure that we ensure that those are addressed so that we've got a high quality service available for our children and young people moving forward to ensure that they can maintain their education within Falkirk Council. Looking at the conclusions, we're obviously working to change how we meet the additional support for learning needs within Falkirk Council and ensuring about the demographic needs of our children. Our next steps really looking to refine the proposal and to bring back a further, much more detailed paper to committee for approval before we then progress thereafter. I'm happy to take any further questions.
Thank you, David. I think this is some of the work that came out of the Policy and Development Panel on Inclusion, and recognising the growing demand and the need to look at how we encourage the mainstream connect, and as a result we obviously recognise the deficiency within where we are at the moment, and the changes within Cam Grange have given us an opportunity to relook at how we actually make the necessary provision, and indeed the demand that has been driven particularly by parents, what they would like to see. While I appreciate 107 of consultations doesn't seem a lot, I do understand that there was an awful lot of other discussions carried out in a more softer and more subjective way, and that not everybody wanted to get involved in completing forms etc. online, but I think the consultation and the responses that have been given have been very, very good, and there's been a range of issues raised which has been very positive, both positive and negative, but the vast majority are saying that the direction of travel is what they would like to see. I'm therefore happy to move the recommendations as in 2.1 to note the response of the consultation, and obviously as David has said, he's going to bring back a further report, a more detailed report that members will be able to scrutinise and be able to see how we are actually take this on and deliver it.
I'm happy to second that report. I believe that educating our children as close to home as possible is a vital move forward for us. too often our children have to move too far away from their own homes to get the right education, and I just welcome this.
Margaret, I think it was no one's on the first statement. Alan?
I don't take issue with the report. You've already highlighted, convener, the issue with the consultation process. Until 7,703 consultation documents issued and a response of 107, that's just shocking. David, you said that was not untypical, but as an authority, what are we doing to try and rectify that and put something in place to make sure that these figures are boosted considerably?
Thank you, Councillor. No, I would agree with you. I mean, I think some of the challenges were mitigated at the local level. So, we're mitigated at the local level with the head teachers engaging with their populations, and the head teachers are feeding back to me that there was broad consensus and trust in the fact that the head teachers were on board with the proposals and the developments, and the conversations that we're having with the schools were fairly positive. The challenge about actually getting people out to either attend the meetings or to actually take the time to respond, I think is something worth pursuing further, and I'd be quite keen to engage with our parent bodies to actually unpick that a little bit in terms of actually the awareness that was there. I do believe that the populations, the communities were aware of the consultation documents had been issued, but for whatever reason there's a lack of engagement in terms of actually taking the time to fill it in, but I do think we could dig down a bit deeper there.
Just following on from that, convener, the total number of responses, 107, do we have any further breakdown of that figure as to how many hard copy responses were received as opposed to email?
I can get that for you for the next meeting, Councillor, and we do have that information in terms of the full breakdown of the responses.
Okay.
Yeah, like Alan, I do have concerns about the response figures. I think it's very, very poor that only 107 responses were received. And I value the fact that we can dig down a bit deeper and see if we can improve on that. There's just a few wee points that I want to ask and to raise. And the first thing is that, with teacher shortages just now, it's getting the right teacher to do the right job. It's going to be a high cost for specialist training for teachers to work with these children. They need the best teachers. They also need the very best staff. They need special people to be working with them. Not everybody can do that job, and I think we've really got to get the very, very best people across all staff that are working in these units. I think I raised it before about Larbert High School being one of the places where a unit is proposed to be going into. Larbert High School, on my understanding, because Karen Grange moved out, Larbert High were going to take over that part of the building. And if a unit is going in over and above the extension to there's pupils already in there who have special education needs. This is just another thing on top of that, taking up more room within Larbert High School. It's very overcrowded at the moment. It's also a very large school, and I have concerns about children with autism going into very, very large places like that. There's also, what are the PFI implications for Larbert High School and Bournemouth Academy? Because these two schools are PFI schools. We don't know them.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Margaret. Obviously, in terms of I would agree with you in terms of the type of colleagues that we're looking to attract for the specific needs of these children and young people needs to be the highest calibre, and that's one reason why we're taking our time. We've already got a number of staff in training. They're working within the current provisions. They will then become available to help prime the new resources to provide that expertise going in. So we're not just recruiting brand new staff to Falkirk to suddenly come into brand new facilities. We're looking to use our existing resources to support that development. But again, it's about making sure that the timescales are appropriate and that we don't rush into it, and we actually do have the resources available for that. In relation to Larbert High School, obviously the additional space that has been now available through Karen Grange relocating is way in excess of what Larbert actually does need. And again, as part of the staged implementation, we are looking at over time the possibility of moving that every single secondary school within Falkirk Council would have the specific resources to meet the needs of children with a whole range of additional support needs, but particularly with autism, given the increased prevalence that we're seeing nationally. So in terms of Larbert High School, we're looking to move all schools there. They have space there. The early discussions that we've had with John Reid and his staff are they're very comfortable with the ability to embrace this initiative within the existing building that they've got. You raised in terms of the PFI, that's the next iteration, that's the final being detail that we need to be working towards in terms of actually what are the specific financial implications now of this particular project going forward. In terms of actually now we've got approval from our parent groups across all of the schools. It's then digging down and actually saying in terms of practically school by school, what does that then mean for Falkirk Council?
I'm right in saying that Bowness isn't one of our PFI schools. But it's not.
Yes, it is.
It's a
Just in terms of the, as the contractual issue, there is no impact in terms of the contract per se for any way we want to utilise internally the space in the school. Yes, there may be a cost if we want to change staff areas to classroom areas, but we've done that successfully as we've really expanded the whole secondary estate. Within a lot of these schools anyway, there's expansion areas that have been built in to allow us to do that. So effectively, you pay the money and it happens. We can determine the internal use of our schools. The contract really is looking at the external bricks and mortar and keeping the schools to a good standard, and it looks at the cleaning and catering arrangements as well. But in terms of Bowness and Lambert, they're both under operating under the Class 98 PPP contract. And in terms of Lambert High School, just to confirm to the Education Exec that the Lambert expansion is really confined to the top floor just now, so within the next couple of years the top floor expansion into the old Carling Grange allows Lambert to meet the capacity pressures that are on it. So effectively our reconfiguration of the ground floor at Lambert does not interfere with the Lambert short-term to medium-term needs in terms of capacity expansion.
But I think I also believe there's the opportunity for our existing staff to support and mentor other staff, because we have some very, very good staff within our schools with Carling Grange, Lakeside, and in some of the supported units, and they can lead some of the learning in particular and the successes. So I think we've got great opportunities in house to be able to do that, and again use of the Educational Collaborative will be able to assist in using all the learning elsewhere to pull on that. Councillor Colley?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I welcome the development. I think it's very important that we find a way to meet the support needs and education needs of children as close to their home as possible. I actually wanted to say that I read through the report and I welcome the very positive response from parents. I think obviously exploring some of the potential challenges. But although the sample size was relatively small, I think the information is very rich. I was particularly struck, and I think probably linking to the issue of large schools and the impact on individuals. I was very struck it came up a number of times about social development and the importance of children and young people being able to have the same educational journey and social journey as their peers. There was a talk of my child wants to go to the same secondary school as their friends. They've been in primary school. They've built up friendships even within the locality as well, and I think that's a very, very important element of it.
Mine just a brief question. I noticed in 6.1 there's a number obviously that's been earmarked. I just wondered whether or not that was directed towards staffing or building, because obviously touching on a couple of points that have been raised earlier in terms of staffing. I'm just wondering whether or not it just doesn't seem a huge amount if you're looking to obviously increase the number of centres
I think, obviously in terms of development, obviously in the current financial climate, it's really just in terms of actually what we've currently got within the budget we're looking to earmark in terms of beginning to roll this development out. And again, obviously that's going to be quite a significant factor over the coming months in terms of actually to what extent can we roll it across all 5, or whether we need to look at pulling that back to ensure that we don't expose ourselves to undue necessary financial risk. Again, obviously, we're working in partnership with the current school population to make sure that we get the demand met by the new service development, but equally we don't overrun it at this particular stage. So really this is the kind of a 1 year funding, and then obviously we're reviewing that thereafter to ensure that we've got sufficient resources available.
Thank you. Kevin Dolan?
Very thorough. Just call me Michael, it's okay. It's a very thorough report and welcome. But one of the things that was raised under 4.3, under those who did not support the proposal, there was something mentioned there. It focuses too much on the most severe additional support needs and does not do anything to help children with less severe needs. Presumably you answered that. If an answer to that, it would be just good to hear that. Thank you.
Certainly, thanks, Michael. It was really just in relation to, in terms of actually a review of inclusion within Falkirk Council, we're undertaking a kind of staged rollout of this, and we're obviously targeting various groups at different stages as we progress. So while this particular project is targeting those children and young people with specific needs within autism, particularly in the primary, it would be those children with higher level of need. Within the secondary, however, it's those children with autism that have the ability to access mainstream provision as well. So it's really clarifying that. Some of the responses were talking about different additional support needs, and the conversation we had with the parents is yes, this is just one particular proposal and project, the same way as the Marmor project is another one we're running out, and then thereafter we're looking at severe complex needs, and then looking at broader additional support for learning across all of our schools. So we're really just trying to reassure parents that while this particular paper and project is related to autism specifically, we're not dealing with it in isolation. There's other considerations been taking place and other bits of work happening with our schools in relation to the central service supporting that through officers and or educational psychologists and speech and language therapists over the next coming months and years thereafter.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor Hughes?
I just wanted a wee bit of clarification. I've probably picked up Gary Greenhorn slightly wrongly here, but just a wee bit of clarification. I took the point about Bowness in terms of PFI and the usage of a PFI school where there's built-in redundancy, if I call it that, and where you can expand certain services. But what I wanted to do is just to check with you about the old Karen Grange School. When you talk about the merger of the Larbert High School, which is a PFI school, and the old Karen Grange. And I just wanted to check, does the old Karen Grange still come under the Education Department? And what we're really talking about is the usage of the building, the management in terms of from Larbert taking over the old Karen Grange, but the building itself would still come under the Education Department. I'm just trying to get that clarification.
I'm certainly glad to clarify that, Convener. Councillor Hughes is absolutely right. For those of you who don't know, especially new members, Karen Grange is attached to Larbert High School, so it is one big building. The two buildings are attached. All that is done is the building is still within the Children's Services asset portfolio, and within that it's under the school estate, so we are responsible for both buildings.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Alexander?
Yeah, just briefly, Chair, I think in terms of consultation, 107 responses is disappointing, but I'm quite sure that if there was something controversial or unpopular on the agenda, the consultation responses would be significantly higher. And I think that can take a wee bit of comfort from the fact that not only are the majority have been submitted positive, but also that there does seem to be an acceptance and understanding of the processes and the policies that are being pursued at the moment. In relation to PFIs, I think a valid point has been raised with regards to these. we're obviously approaching the final phase of the contract with Class 98. We're, I think, 7 years from the end of that particular contract, so there will have to be a significant amount of work undertaken with regards to the transfer, and obviously it's not quite a Bosman because we'll have to pay a fee, so that's something that's going to have to be looked at and built into the process as we negotiate with not only the government with regards to capital resources, but also with the Class 98.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bowes.
I think about just a little bit more clarification. The philosophy of closer to home, the results, some of the stuff I've read for that said the results can be quite dramatic. Can you just fill out a wee bit on that, because the most important thing in what we're doing here is actually the children. And I appreciate people have asked questions about some other bits and pieces, but for me personally, it's the children. If you fill that out for me a little bit, please.
No, certainly, Councillor. Obviously, the Closer Home agenda, we have got very strong research data in terms of the outcomes for children that have educational experiences other than within their local authority or within their own home setting. Also within Children's Services, we're working very closely with Education Division and also with our colleagues in Children, Family Social Work to ensure that as far as possible we maintain our children and young people within our council. Again, that's done on an individual pupil by pupil basis, because obviously the specific needs of each individual child and young person is quite varied and different, and what we really want to ensure that as far as possible we've got them placed in the correct place, whether that's at home with support, whether it's in kinship care or whether it's in our local authority residential establishments, and then ensure that we've got adequate educational provision wrapped around them with other supports as well to ensure that that is then successful. We've also in the last number of months brought back a number of children and young people who have been in independent residential care, specifically around behaviour, and we've brought them back into Falkirk Council and they're now back into Mariner, and they've got packages of support built round about them to ensure that they're connected with their community, because the challenge in the past has been children that have been placed in independent schools generally do okay, but the challenge is when you then bring them back in, they're quite detached from their community, and then their outcome longer term is less positive for them. So really what we're hoping to do by working collaboratively with colleagues across the council and with the families and carers, ensure that the best possible resources are brought to bear around those children to ensure that those needs are met locally, and make sure that connection is maintained.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, I think we've given this a fair hearing, and officers have had a fair bit of scrutiny there. If everybody is content, we agree with the report. Thank you. On a similar theme, we now have the report back on the permanent relocation of the Mariner Support Service. I think this has been a very positive relocation, particularly for the children, and has been again integral in taking our forward our policy. Gary?
Thanks so much, Convener. I'm delighted to bring this report the long last back to Education Executive this morning. There are three recommendations for Education Executive today. One is to note, as the Convener said, the response to the formal statutory consultation exercise undertaken, agree that the Mariner Support Service is permanently relocated from the previous site at Readingshall to the current site at the Lauriston campus, and subsequently agree that the Readingshall site is then declared surplus to Children's Services operational requirements, which is a prerequisite of the council processing asset disposal. By way of background in the section 3, it's worth pointing out that the Mariner Support Service has been in situ located at the Lauriston campus. This is the second academic year that it's already been in situ there. 3.2 outlines, and it comes back to some of the points that we made earlier on, the low response rate. I think there was a lot of informal communicational work done with parents, staff and the pupils at Readingshall that was located there, and I think the significant work that was done there has paid dividend in making the smooth transition to it. And also, as you'll see later on, it's probably part of that work, the informal process that was done that isn't reported on, that probably is responsible for the low response rate, as you'll see when we talk about the response to the consultation. Education Executive agreed on the 13th of June 2007 to agree to process the formal strategy to the consultation. And the delay here was really just to check with the government that they wanted us to do it, because really the manor had been relocated there, and that's in situ for one academic year, one full year, without any problem. But the government and the legal advice we had was that we still to do the statutory consultation to formally change the school to a permanent location. That's why the paper was brought to executive. In terms of the timelines were the timelines associated with any statutory consultation are outlined in section 4.1. 4.2 outlines the consultation response. And I think what's been built on earlier, it sums up why the consultation. I think Councillor Alexander is absolutely right. The fact that if there was major issues on site with concerns of parents, the response numbers would have gone up quite a lot. Bear in mind that there's between 25 and 30 children. The responses should be put in context of that. It's not a large school. However, I think the low response rate per se is reflective on the significant work that was undertaken at the informal process to get things right. And I think the Education Exec should be commended for giving us the foresight and back in doing that process. Also, I think that the fact that schools being in situ has been reflected on it. And I think the formal strategy consultation process does, however we want to taint it, put off a number of families from engaging in it. They will engage informally, and I think as a service we've got a challenge as to how we change that consultation informally and taking it a step up and trying to encourage families to respond to the statutory concept, especially families that are maybe deemed to be slightly harder to reach than others. So I think as a service we've got to follow, and I think the point that was made earlier on about lack of consultation, we need to look at that to see how we can support families in doing that. But at the same time, any statutory consultation process has to be deemed to be fairly independent. So there's a level of support, but there's also a level of independence. And sometimes getting the balance right is a challenge for us all. 4.3 outlines the public meeting that was held. The details of the public meeting are attached as part of an integral part of Appendix 1. The main issues that were arising from the consultation process, and again, there are always these consultation processes, no matter how good it is, there are always things that come up, there are challenges. These are around the repairs and maintenance. Bear in mind it is an older building that we're trying to adapt as we go through the years to be an education campus. And there's challenges there, and we're tackling these face on as we say it. So the issues that were raised around some of the repairs and maintenance issues and around availability of parking. Availability of parking at any school is always an issue with a lot of staff anyway. So again, we'll look at them in terms of the school estate planning and we'll try to do some of the work that's been outlined in this paper has already been done or is in the process of being done. Very pleased in section 4.5 that the Managing Inspectorate endorsed the proposals and they agreed that the proposals is of educational benefit. Members only need to look at the old building at Regents Hall and what they've got now on site at the Lauriston campus to see effectively it's a night and day situation. So anyone that wants to look at that can see objectively, very transparently, that there is educational benefit. Yes, there's on-site things we want to do in the years ahead, and yes, we will do them. Again, it's a proportionate response. We can't do everything overnight, but we are committed to do it. In terms of section 5, look at the implications. Apart from the commitment to undertake some of the repairs and maintenance, will be met within our repairs and maintenance budget. That's the main thing under the implications. Conclusion, in terms of section 6, it lays it out that the Education Scotland have concluded that as part of our consultation there is education benefit for the move, and they endorse that. In terms of the formal agreement to the permanent move, it's to ensure that Children's Services can continue to develop the site to further meet the opportunities and needs of the pupils and also offer the staff a better teaching environment. I think that's very important. I think also the point was made earlier on getting the right staff to do that also embraces some of the things that we need to do and take forward on that side. And the last bit is we've got to, if we agree the recommendations, also officially declare the previous site surplus to operational requirements, in which case Children's Services pass it over to colleagues in the corporate asset team and they'll arrange for the disposal of it or other use of it in the normal council manner. So overall, given the unanimous endorsement and proposal, I don't really propose to go over anything in Appendix 1. Everything's been endorsed fully by everybody, but I'm happy to answer any questions on the report at the meeting today. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Anybody who has been here for any period of time would remember that the move to Readings Hall was always ever meant to be temporary. It turned out to be a bit longer than temporary. And those that had the opportunity to visit Readings Hall and actually see the environment would have been, very disheartened, and that's why we had to do better for our kids that attended that particular facility. The staff did a tremendous job with what they had. An old building, it was an old children's home. It didn't actually lend itself to modern teaching or a modern environment, or indeed have all the spaces that was needed to deal with some of the complex needs of the children. The alternative, the Mariner unit, which was previously a school, became available, and council chose to purchase that. And we have looked to adapt that, and there's potential there. The environment is so much better, there's so much more space. That's more useful and conducive, and everybody's been very positive about it. I met with parents at the time of the cohort that were actually attending Mariner, and they just wanted it to happen as quickly as possible, because they could see the benefits of it. So I'm pleased that we've got through this process, we've gone through the statutory consultation, and I'm happy to move the recommendations at 2.1. To note the formal response of the proposals, agreed Mariner Support Service permanently moved to Lawrison campus, and that they pass Readings Hall forward for a surplus to requirements.
Happy to second that.
Councillor Nimmo, take you first time.
Thanks, Convener. I agree this is a very positive report. I'm very pleased with the outcome in respect to this. To a certain extent it's been a paper exercise because the kids have been there for some time now. Of course, this is something that the previous administration brought forward, and we're very proud of the initiative and the outcome. The only issue I have, yet again, is regarding the consultation process. Gary, you mentioned informal consultation. I'm not so sure there's such a thing under the statutory consultation, but I'll take guidance on that.
There's two processes. One, we're going to go through an informal process of going out to effectively tell people what we're planning before we go ahead and plan it. Again, any good planning or any good planner always knows it's a bit of homework, it's what's ahead of you. So during the process, we were engaging with the parents. There was no parent council set up at the school when we first started this process. So we met the parents and said, look, if the opportunity came our way, here's what we want to do. Now, at the time when we did this, we didn't know where the building was going to be located. And I think it's testimony to the education executive members at the time that we had the foresight to see a school that was up for sale on our doorstep. And I don't think there's many councils in Scotland that can say they've went out and bought a school, but Falkirk have. So I think everyone should be commended for giving us the backing and also the foresight to do it, because there were challenges in that. So we effectively bought the school, and that effectively opened up an avenue for us to look at that relocation. And you're right, the informal process was looking at the staff needs, the pupil needs, the parent needs. In that process, everything was very positive. The informal process gave us the surety and commitment that what we were doing was the right thing. There was a few questions from staff, a few questions from pupils, but there was no real negativities with that, which means that when you look at mathematics in terms of probability or certainty, we were 95% certain that this would go through. So I think you were right that the statutory consultation, whilst it is necessary, it was very much a reflective of paper exercise, because the school had been on site for well over one academic year. We were dealing with issues. The feedback that we had on the ground level was positive at a number of levels in terms of staff, the pupils and parents. We weren't picking a lot of negativity. There are always many school challenges, and we're trying to address these challenges as they come up. So the statutory one, and we've tried effectively to take legal advice and say, do we need to do it? And legal advice says, yes, you need to do it. So you're right, we had to do the statutory one. There is no record of the informal process, because we don't really need to keep it, other than try to get a sense of direction and certainty and feeling on the ground level. And I think as everyone would do it, and we look at the early years exercise, there's a huge amount of informal work going there to look at the needs of parents, what staff needs, what head teachers think of it. So we don't always record it. The statutory one sometimes is a bit negative because it looks at the low numbers, but the low numbers certainly don't reflect a huge amount of time and effort that's gone into this to make sure that we get it right. And I think as officers, we wouldn't have pushed ahead with it unless we were sure we were going to get it right. And I think getting it right for the child is what we've got here, and I think everyone should commend you on it, albeit we do take the point that the low response. I think there's genuine reasons for that, and I think the genuine reasons, as mentioned earlier, if there's any negativity, it would have surfaced before now. So.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just to say that Readings Hall definitely was not a suitable premises, it was awful. And so Lauriston campus is a vast improvement for everybody. So I think the staff are certainly very, very happy there, and I'm sure the pupils are happy there too. But it's 4.5, the report from Education Scotland, that's a wee bit concerning to me. Given the report from Education Scotland, what work has been done or is in planning to improve the concerns raised by Education Scotland, both with the facility and, more importantly, to support the curriculum at Larrain?
Okay. I think had Education Scotland visited the old Regent's Hall site, the concerns that have been raised then would have been a lot more than they are now. For members' own information, the HM inspections actually were in the Mariner Support Service inspecting the service in the last couple of weeks. Last week. So we'll actually wait to see what the findings are there, so that we can dovetail how we look at improvements on site, improvements to the curriculum, improvements to their findings. So effectively this gives us a real opportunity to use Education Scotland as almost internal auditors, as arbiters, to say where do we want to take it forward from now on. And really it will give us, hopefully, an endorsement of what we've got is the building blocks or the basics for a good service moving forward. So I think you're right, Margaret, we need to use the Education Scotland report and the experience and findings to actually bring and draw together a strategic way forward in terms of expansion on the site, in terms of improvements on the site, and we know that there's one or two improvements we need to make, mainly around some of the Wi-Fi stuff as well, which we dwelled on earlier on. But bear in mind it was an old territorial army base at one time, so some of the walls are quite thick, so we've got a number of challenges in terms of Wi-Fi connectivity, but we're dealing with that. So I think what we'll be using is the findings from Education Scotland that comes out to look at that and see and target or prioritise way to take it forward.
Really, for me, more importantly is the curriculum.
Yeah,
the criticisms obviously they had around the curriculum areas that are maybe not being covered as well. I don't know.
And I think that's obviously in terms of actually David McKellar, the head teacher, he's relatively new into post, but he's working very hard with the staff team there. One of his priorities is very much about the curriculum and about the day length and about the kind of construction, about the experience of our children and young people that are attending the base. So that's very much in the focus of the work that they're actually doing. And obviously it's our job at the centre then to support the school in order to progress that beyond what it currently is, and ensure that those children and young people get the best possible learning opportunity that they can. And I think we've got a commitment to that, and I think we've now got a strong drive within the service now to realise that once they've got the supports and in terms of whatever that may be, and hopefully that will be fully validated by the HMIE visit last week. We await their full report with anticipation, and again I think that will really just give David a very strong mandate to progress with the service and really to grow and to develop it beyond the kind of walls of the physical location of the Marlin Support Service, because the service, while we've got a number of children and young people that attend there daily, the service meets the needs of children and young people across all of our secondary schools, and it's making sure that all of our children have the opportunity to connect with their local secondary school as well, and David needs to know are very much working towards that in partnership with our secondary colleagues.
Yeah, convener, Alan's right, the previous administration do deserve credit for bringing this forward, and the credit where credit is due. The public wanted to see us working together, and I think this was a project where it was a good example of opposition and administration working together. If you remember, I actually seconded the motion to purchase the school. At that point in time it was put on hold, but my colleague, the leader of the party, Tom Coleman, was very keen on this particular project, and they pushed very, very hard for it. And I think it was a good example, as I say, of members working together for a common goal, and that goal is very much to deal with the deficiencies that we knew were in the system at that point in time in relation to this group of people. So I think that the whole council can congratulate itself. There will be, I would imagine, glitches. There will be problems that will arise, and these problems will be resolved as they arise. I've no doubt about that, because I think that the grasp of what's required has been accepted and picked up and run with by the directorate, and the vision that I think the elected members, for all persuasions, saw in this particular project is becoming a reality, and that's something that I think should be welcome.
Thank you for that, Councillor Alexander. If there's nothing yet, no other comments or questions related to this report, the review report. Thank you. The has now become a standing item, and will continue to be a standing item as we move forward. Is the Early Learning and Childcare 2022 Expansion Plan. Gary?
Thanks again. I'm really pleased to bring this report, although I think I'll be saying that for the next 2 years anyway. But nonetheless, things move forward, and it's always good to give an update to the executive. Just by way, you remember, I say that to my right is Karen Thompson. Karen Thompson's the early year lead, early project officer, leads on the early years project. So between us, hopefully after the report, we'll answer any questions. Certainly, purpose of the report is outlined in section 1. It's two things to do today. It's to give you feedback on the recent liaison meetings that have been held with the Scottish Government Early Years team, and to give you the proposed updates and changes to Children's Service Strategic Early Years and Childcare Expansion Plan. There's 3 recommendations before the Executive today outlined in section 2. Recommendation 1 is to note the feedback from the recent liaison meetings held with the Government's Education team, endorse and agree the proposed changes to be made to the Strategic Expansion Plan, and unfortunately agree that a further report is brought back to the Executive as the plan's progress, and that will become apparent because things afoot this week that will make significant progress in guidance and change things in that one. Again, as the Director said, Rob said earlier on, this is iterative and it changes almost every week, and it is a large project and it is work in progress, so I think we've all got to recognise that things do change in it. By way of background, the initial Strategic Expansion Plan, which was endorsed by the Executive back in November, was submitted to the Government at the end of September on time last year. The submission included a fully detailed set of financial template statistics around revenue and capital investment in various things. Following the 32 council submission of these, it's been widely reported that the totality of ask was greater than what the government's estimate of the finances were. Liaison meetings were then held with the government's early years team, and I have to say these were very positive meetings within the early years expansion team. For members' information, there was representative for Scottish Futures Trust and also the Improvement Service, and also the head meetings with all 32 councils. Our meeting with them was held on the 30th of October in Edinburgh, and we went through in detail our plan with them, and we got very useful feedback on it. In terms of the considerations, section 4, considerations are twofold. There was considerations that was fed back on a national basis, that certain things that all 32 authorities could look at and consider, and there was individual comments and about focus plans to say focus on these areas. So it's almost like an HMI inspection of our plan in many ways. So there was national feedback and there was some local feedback. And I have to say that's a really, really good way to do it, in our opinion. Certainly section 4.1 looks at some of the national feedback, and some of these, given what we've said before, really come as no surprise to us when 32 authorities all sign in and do things 32 different ways. It's quite a task for the government to try and align it all, and really this is what the process we're in. It's about looking at what's proportionate, what's neat, and it tries to align it better, and nobody can argue with that. The key points that were raised in terms of the national position for authorities was that they should ensure that actual plant capacity is proportionate, and proportionate is going to be a key word as we go through that. What that actually means is looking at annualised hours, not capacity. It looks at annualised hours to look at what capacity we've got in terms of what actual demand we need. So it's looking at the number of children that we have projected, multiplying that simplistically by 140 hours, and then looking at the totality of capacity aligned to opening hours and bring it to an annualised hours. And that makes a slight difference, because if you look at some of the capacity we've got in the early years, if it's an AM only provision, sometimes you look at total capacity and it's AM only. But the AM only then becomes converted to an annualised hour. So we're looking at those buildings that have AM only and those buildings that are open all day. An annualised hour gives you a certainty and surety of the total annualised hours that we can avail. So looking at the annualised hours that bulk parents can tap into is what we've been doing since we last spoke. Second one was we should look at maximising use of existing properties, partner provision and outdoor space. Again, we spoke about it the last time. There's no secret that best value determines if you've got it, try and adapt it before you put new bricks and mortar up or trying to expand it. And that's what we're trying to do. Outdoor spaces is one that was effectively a challenge for us all. We recognise the need to do it, but up until now there's been not a lot of guidance as to how we determine outdoor space. How do we use it in terms of toilet provision, shelter and things like that. So there's been a number of examples that have been put forward, very helpful examples, so we can look at it. So that's one of the things that going forward we're going to look to really significantly review what we do in terms of outdoor space. The third one is no surprise. It was looking at the different ways local authorities do cost calculations. Now, accountants are accountants. Every accountant can do things differently. If you have 12 sets of figures in the room, you may get 12 different answers. And that's effectively what we had here, all an array of different calculations, all with individual backing and basis. So what the early years team are trying to do is look at it and try to give us alignment in terms of the use of appropriate indices, in terms of the use of how we calculate a projection ahead. And sometimes it's as simple as aligning it to the academic and financial years, because the academic year transcends 2 financial years. So there was lots of guidance and given back about that. I have to say that broadly our figures were very good. There was a lot of backing to it. A lot of councils struggle with it because of their own individual needs. So looking at the 32, that was the feedback that we had. Again, the fourth one was really focusing on utilising the developed outdoor areas. And that's it. Just to say that we're all going to a meeting, and we're all, Carl and myself, a meeting on Friday in Perth. All 32 councillors are going to be there. It's a meeting of the ADS 2 networks, the resource network and the early years in the government. It's a full day meeting, and the full day meeting is looking at the feedback from that and looking at the guidance that the government are going to give us to do the next stage, or come on to the next stage of the process in a minute. The government then wrote to all 32 authorities at the end of November, and they provided an update, and they confirmed that there was 4 aims of the letter: update on the process, to confirm that there were significant differences between the revenue and capital cost estimates and the government's estimates. You would expect that on any major project, I have to say. The third thing was to provide advice and clarity to local authorities in terms of what they need to focus on with their own plans, which I've emphasised to you. And probably one that is important is to confirm that as part of the government's budget, they will be announcing a 1-year settlement for every year. So we're expecting, as we go through the 18-19 budget, that we'll get a 1-year financial settlement for early years. And that's a factor for us to consider when we're looking at longer term planning. In section 4.3, the key changes that we're proposing to make to our strategic expansion plan, I have to say that before I'm asking the question, where is the expansion plan? The expansion plan will come, and it will be a full expansion plan at the next meeting, probably in March, because up until now we don't quite know what money we're going to get next year. We don't quite know what the template that we've got to fill in going ahead is like, but I think we'll get that clarity on Friday. So I think if this meeting was next week, I could give you a bit more surety about it, but as we sit at the moment, there's a bit of work in progress to be done. But at the next update of this, you'll see the expansion plan, and some of the things that we're talking today will be included in that expansion plan. Again, the feedback that we got, the government are really looking at parental flexibility levels. How do you assess that? What do you allow to build in for parental flexibility? At the same time as making sure it's proportionate. So you're not going to have every provision we've got open 8 till 6, 50 weeks of the year. That would be too much. So again, the proportionate is to draw in, and that's what we're trying to do and bring to you today. Again, the capacity levels are compared to demands. We know what our demand is, so we've got to make sure the capacity we have is greater than demand, but not 3 or 4 times as much as demand, because base value wouldn't tick that box if you're trying to do that. So looking at everything in an annualised way, I think that's a much better way to do it than just looking at the capacity places alone. Well, we would have both. I think also it removes the confusion with some of the buildings that we have that maybe don't open all year, or term time only, or the AM or PM only provision. So it makes it a better way to do it. Children's Services reviewed the existing expansion plans insofar as the current guidance that we had. And looking back to the previous report, we know our projected uptake in 2020 is 4,068, which is the number of eligible 2-year-olds and our 3 and 4-year-olds. It's quite easy to then look at that figure and say that our maximum annual hours of demand is about 4.6 million hours. So that's what we need in our system and in the private sector to cope, and that's what we're working on just now. In terms of Falkirk Council established availability, it's in section 432. What we're looking at is 4 delivery methods. Now, the government have said that they expect parental flexibility to be at least 15% built into your equation, so effectively the 4.6 million you're allowed to increase it by 15% in terms of total hours that the capacity within Falkirk has. There are areas where you can extend it slightly longer, slightly larger, and that's what we're going to hopefully work out how far should we push that boat in terms of parameters, and we'll get some guidance on that, I think, on Friday. Looking at what we've got, we're looking at 4 delivery models. The first one is nursery classes that will be open 9 till 3. For those of you that remember the consultation we did, 76 will be correct here, 76% of parents opted for a model that aligned it to the primary day. So that first delivery model aligns it to the primary day. The second one is, in some nursery classes we will open 8 till 6. We'll also have, and that'll be term time, first to term time. What we'll have on top of that is our early year centres and day nurseries open 8 to 6, 50 weeks a year. And on top of that we'll have an interface with the private sector. What we're looking at doing, as we said before, is when you get the next report in March, it will spell that out on a ward-by-ward basis, and we're trying to equalise it so every ward has access to the same type of provision. We certainly will also bear in mind geographic factors and rural factors when we do that, and we're hoping to get some guidance or pointers on that on Friday. So when you get the next report, you'll see it on a ward-by-ward basis exactly what nursery classes will be open 9 till 3, what ones will be open 8 till 6. And in the next report you will have total and say that our capacity of annualised hours is that, and that will compare it with the demand. And hopefully we'll be within the parameters that the government set, but it's not certain yet. We hope to find out on Friday. So that's why if this report was a week later we would probably walk around for this, but we are where we are. Typical working progress at its best, I'd have to say. Anyway, the 3 things that we've got to deliver are also mentioned there. We've got to align 1140 hours to the primary rate. We've done that. 76% of parents asked for that. Offer a day provision at some nurseries, and again this is in rurality to other day centres will come into that, especially in certain wards. And offer parents a choice of provision. And Appendix 1 summarises that, what we're looking at just now. Again, the private sector will come into the next report looking at how much capacity will we allow the partner private nurseries. Again, from the last meeting already, in partnership with any private nursery in Falkirk that wants to build partnership with us, the extent of that capacity and availability will be dependent on the next report as we go in. But currently our partnership, as we agreed before, has been expanded to all that want to join us, shall we say. And that's been successful. In terms of the revised capacity in 2020, the analysis will be done on a ward-by-ward basis, and that will be fully covered in the next report we bring. Financial resources for 18-19, what I can tell you with certainty is the totality of resources in revenue and capital that are outlined in the next section. Revenue is 52.2 million, and capital is 150 million. The methodology distribution has been discussed with COSLA on Friday. And we'll wait and see. Once we get that, we will hopefully be told what revenue money we're going to get and what capital money we're going to get from next year. We expect revenue one will be known soon. The capital one, my best guess here, as a guess, is that we'll wait quite rightly until we resubmit our expansion plan with the financial template, which is due to be submitted on the 9th of February. So I think that the government would like to wait till they add up all the resubmissions based on the guidance we're going to get on Friday, and they would look at allocating the capital monies then. Certainly you can do a number of things with revenue money, so it's causal decision on Friday to look at that. So as soon as we get that, that'll certainly be reported back in March as well. In terms of the submission of further data, as I said earlier on, that we're due to submit a revised expansion plan and financial template by the 9th of February. The meeting on Perth on Friday will go a long way to give us some comfort, look at parameters, and give us surety and certainty that what we're doing is within those parameters and suits, more importantly, the children and parents of Falkirk. We've not yet got the revised template, so we can't complete it, or we're not in the process of completing it because it's not been issued to us yet. We expect it to come out after Friday. Much as we would like to say we're halfway through it, we're not. We've not started, but we've got ideas on loads of bits of paper. In terms of the risk, again, in any major project, your asset risk will always cover buildings, staff and cash. And we'll just have to make sure that we bear these in mind as we get through the project. We don't have any inclination that there's going to be any worse off than anything else, but certainly they're the 3 main risk areas. The cash that we get, what we're hoping to do in the March report when it comes, we may not know the capital resources in March, when the March report comes to the executive, what we hope to do is say, here's our priority of year 2 projects. Depending on the level of capital we get, we will determine how far down that list we go. But you'll see that list with certainty and surety at the next report. Conclusions in the report are that, again, this is a very good example of regional collaboration. We do talk to our collaborative partners. We don't try to do what that they've done. Again, Stirling is leading some of the things for us, but we'll all come together as 32 on Friday, but we do have a reasonable amount of dialogue and positive dialogue at that with our collaborators. There's lots of work being done internally with development services. We need to get the technical staff to give us the technical advice that we need to make decisions and bring them to the executive, and we also closely link to the strategic property review in terms of determining best value for the properties we've got and the best use going forward as the council in certain areas does downsize to make sure that if we're downsizing it, can we get access to property. So it's behind the scenes there's lots of collaboration and very positive work going on with our range of partners. And again, in broken record time I suppose, it's expected that these expansion plans will be work in progress. We're not expected, it's a certainty will as we get to the next 2 to 3 years, and you'll probably head up hear me from me and Karen. But nonetheless, I'm happy to answer any questions on that, and I think the next report that Brian March will have a lot more flesh on the bones.
Thank you, Gary. I think you have dangled the March report very tantalisingly in front of everybody, and there's a great expectation on that report, so there's no pressure there. So I think members will be very keen to see exactly what the proposals are. I think within the budget process, you're right, we are where we are, and it is often in these large infrastructure projects a case when you're dealing with 32 authorities that there's an element of negotiation required because not everybody is starting from the same level. But I think I have a lot of confidence in our team in being able to put forward very realistic proposals, which I hope will be very, very favourable in their submission and getting the funding. But we do have to remember it is a phased process. We would like to do it all tomorrow. Unfortunately, we don't have all the resources, and that's not necessarily the financial resources to be able to deliver all of that in one go. And there's an awful lot of planning in doing that, and that's not just the physical planning but the workforce planning as well. So I think it's a holding report right now. It gives us a snapshot of where we are. I think it's positive, it's moving forward. We have to remember the advantages in doing this to the development of our young people, and there are added value in around the economic aspects of creating jobs and creating employability, particularly within not just the care sector, but those that will be able to access employment as a result of having additional childcare. So I'm happy to move the recommendations as in 2.1, that we note the feedback with regard to the Scottish Government's early years team. We endorse the plan, and I think it does give the flexibility to parents, and certainly we look forward to that report.
I'm happy to second that report. Just a few of my own comments. To repeat Gary's words, yes, it is very much a work in progress at its best. I'd like to thank Gary and Karen and the whole team, because it is a huge project and they are working very hard on that project. I'd just like to highlight as we go, as we all recognise it's a huge project with huge change, that we bear in mind the staff that are involved in that project, and that we take our staff with us at every step of the way. Anxiety always comes around through change. So we must ensure that staff are involved at every level to ensure that we keep the good staff that we have that are working in the background all the time, and obviously to support the new staff the huge amount of new staff that we're going to be bringing on board.
I don't know who was first this time, but we think ladies first.
I mean, I welcome the report, and I appreciate it's a work in progress, and I look forward to the much more detailed one next meeting. It's 5.3, Gary, the risk, and it kind of ties up with that. It's ensuring that staff are recruited on time. And this is my big book there, and I've gone on and on and on about it in various forums. We want the best quality of early years education and care, in childcare, across Scotland, and we want it in Falkirk Council. But we've got to have quality in the quantity, and I mean in the buildings, but most of all with the staff. Now, I think we have a fantastic modern apprenticeship programme, and you've heard me talking about this at this committee before. Do we have plans to expand the modern apprenticeship scheme? Because it's our own staff who are training our own staff, our potential staff. And from that we get the quality that we want, that we need in Falkirk Council. It's going to come at an immense cost, all of this expansion. And I think we've got to be prepared for an immense cost from across Scotland, and not just in Falkirk.
I totally agree with that, Margaret. If members recall, we brought a report probably 2 or 3 meetings ago that said that we're looking at the totality of the workforce and what we expect the expansion to be. And part of that, an integral part, was the expansion of modern apprentices. Was it from 8?
We currently bring in, or we were bringing in 8 per academic session, and that increased to 16 last year and 32 this current year. Our plan is that next year we'll have a total of 40 students currently going through it over the 3-year period, and we're actually meeting with the employee training unit next week to talk about the next tranche of how we increase that again. I'm working closely with the department that train the modern apprentices, and we are capturing them as soon as qualified to then secure them in our authority.
What we say in terms of the March report, if we can get clarity on the financial template we submit, we would aim to give a more detailed breakdown of the staff need going forward, and part of that would look at the training and the recruitment process. So as long as we can get the clarity and the financial bit, we can bring that to the March report as well, and we'll do that, Margaret.
Thank you. Councillor Nimmo.
Thanks, Mayor. I have a question, but can I just say I'm a bit concerned about the statement that Gary made initially. 12 different accountants equals 12 different answers. Hopefully we'll get the right answer here. My question relates to Appendix 1 and page 103. It's at the bottom of the chart regarding childminders. It's not just about childminder, it's about early learning. So what training are we going to put in place for these childminders? Because I know we have quite a few, and it's going to get bigger.
Okay. Just to answer your first question, Councillor Nimmo, in terms of if there was certainty of an answer, 12 accountants would give you, each would give you the correct answer. Where there's uncertainty or different parameters, you would get 12 different answers, and each of those answers would be the best and beneficial for each of the councils involved. So just to clarify that position, just in case I misled anyone, I don't have my calculator here today, but anyway. And I'll pass the camera, will answer the second
bit. We're currently in a process of discussing with the Scottish Childminders Association about how we enter into partnerships with our childminders across the authority. As part of the consultation, the number of parents that would have intimated that would be their preferred choice is fairly low. However, we will still try and meet that across the authority. As with all our private nurseries, when childminders become a partnership member within the authority, they will be entitled to tap into all our 3PD sessions that all our private nursery staff do as well. So in terms of the quality of the curriculum, we would set parameters for our childminders and what we would expect from them, just similar to what we do for our private nurseries.
So they would have to take up the training before they're actually allowed to...
They don't have to be qualified in terms of registration with the care inspector, but we wouldn't ask them to be qualified as our early years practitioners. They are registered with the SSSC, the Scottish Social Services Council, and that they would honour the codes of practice that they have through that. So we would work in partnership with them, using the codes of conduct in their SSSC, and also about the parameters that we would expect them to track and monitor the learning and progress of that child. They may well be in a shared placement where they're in one of our establishments or one of our private nurseries and a childminder, and we would work with them so that there's a transition process as well across both establishments or both providers.
Councillor Alexander?
Yeah, I was interested to hear the accountancy profession trying to catch up with the legal profession. There's still some way to go because they can manage 13 out of 12. Sorry, come on. We should remember as well that this exercise is not just about education, it's about employability, and it's about improving the local economy and giving people an opportunity to find work and to find work that benefits them and their families. So I think that the progress that's been made is quite significant. Like everyone else, I look forward to the March report, and you realise you have set a standard, and we'll obviously get that level of detail in the March report. But to date, I'm more than happy with the progress that's been made in this particular front. It's a huge piece of work, a huge change within the communities that we represent as well, and that's something that we perhaps haven't had to face up to yet, but we will over the next couple of years. And I'm quite sure that the Department are up for it. That it is important that we recognise the importance of not just the educational aspect but the employability aspect as well, and the excellent news about the modern apprentices. To grow your own is an old cliche, but it's something that gives value for money, but also gives us that opportunity to see the individual develop, and gives a good indication of the qualities that they will bring in later years. So I think that an excellent report and well done to the women involved.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further questions or comments, we're happy to review the report. Okay. Can I thank everybody for their attendance this morning?
Thank you.